this is John Potter. I'm the chair of Pilot Assistance team at WestJet, and this is a special episode of PIREP. And in light of Mental Health Awareness Month in May and ALPA's Are You in the Green, we'd like to discuss pilot mental health. Thanks again for being here with us today, Doug. For those of you who maybe didn't hear our last podcast with Doug McKibbon, he's here again with us today to talk about pilot mental health. Doug's a workplace consultant, psychologist, and mental health professional. So thanks again.
Glad to be here.
And could you just tell us a little bit again about your background in aviation?
So I've always worked in workplaces in terms of being a mental health professional and a psychologist. For the last 25 years, I've been working primarily in aviation. Worked with Continental and United Airlines in their employee assistance program. So I was in-house and provided that support, getting people assessed and referred, and provided a lot of support, particularly for pilots. In the recovery program, as much of my work has been in substance abuse and recovering and getting people back to the line, getting them back with their medical certificate. Yeah, I was able to retire 7 years ago from United and moved back here to Calgary. I'm based here in Calgary and work with a number of physicians and treatment teams, do evaluations, and provide a lot of support to the WestJet Pilot Recovery Program, along with some of the other programs that are offered by other airlines across the country.
Thanks for that, Doug. You know, I think the term mental health is, really prevalent in the modern world here. ALPA has Are You in the Green campaign, which they promote as ALPA International. But oftentimes mental health, I think, is sort of treated cursory or sort of surface inspection here. And, today I think we'd really like to sort of dig into that a bit more and see what that means for pilots. I think in general terms, Doug, us pilots have a certain personality type. I think we might agree. I mean, not generalizing for everyone, but what makes us a successful pilot, really, and what things can expose us to mental health risks because of these sort of traits we have.
So it's interesting that there is an idea, or it's this personification of what is an ideal pilot. And for too long it was it has to be a boy, and it's like so not. And so there's been this sense of it has to be in a certain way. Yes, there are certain characteristics, and they tend to be fairly self-assured and fairly self-confident. The last thing I want is an unconfident person flying a metal tube 5 miles above the earth. So of course we want a few characteristics of being narcissistic, if you will, being determined and being able to sort of project a sense of I got this. They're quite disciplined. There's a real sense of being disciplined and structured, not only from our military experience, but there needs to be that so that you can rely on one another in a two-crew environment, and that there's a sense that everybody has their individual spot and their individual responsibilities. So people need to know what's their part and stay in their own lane. And for the most part, pilots are really good at that. Generally, they're quite emotionally stable. They're very low on what we might call sort of crazy-making thinking. So they're quite low on that, and they tend to be a little bit more extroverted. Not everybody, but there is this profile, and for the most part, they're open and agreeable. They're being able to sort of look forward and say, "Oh, well, we got turbulence today. Well, this will make it a little fun for us." Not so much for the people in the back, but we'll work with them and give them a sense of safety and comfort and assuredness. And they are very much, often there's a sense of very conscientious. Practice and practice and practice and hours and do it again and do it again. And so there's a real sort of almost a solid work ethic. And so pilots will have a sense of, I got this. They don't have much of a sense of being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. I can sort of, I got this. It's windy? Sure, bring it on. So again, assertiveness, a sense of very low levels of perceived vulnerability. On the flip side, they're usually quite hyper and self-critical. Because it's like, no, I'm flying this airplane. I know this.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense that, that can be a bit of a turn, because it's like, oh, are you open to other viewpoints? Not necessarily. And so that can be sometimes a bit of the challenge.
Yeah, we're certainly, I think, with the responsibility of being a professional pilot and doing things correctly and safely is a top of mind at all times, of course. I think at WestJet in particular, I think we were all hired somewhere in the interview process. We kind of gave an example of our can-do attitude and our getting the job done attitude, so to speak. And sometimes I think, that can be a detriment to us. We need to know when, lack of a better aviation term, when to go around, essentially. And, this, we're obviously not just talking about it in the flight deck. This is our, how we're feeling, what's going on in our lives, and when we're fit to fly, And so those traits you sort of spoke about, how do we recognize it? I think that's a real difficult thing to do. How do we recognize when something's going on and maybe our can-do attitude is not helping us anymore?
And so I really like that phrase of, are you in the green? Because that really captures am I flexible enough to be able to handle a go-around? Am I okay if all of a sudden I have a diversion? Or what happens if, we don't get pushed out on time this time? And, can I handle the struggles or the normal routine aspects of my job, which are so not routine and require a degree of not only flexibility, but almost a nimbleness of emotional thinking to be able to do the job in a good way? It's interesting how in many cases when we get a medical, there's a sense that our physical body is what's been most important. And often now we're coming to realize that, my mental health game is just as important as my physical one. And so being in the green can be really powerful to say, am I physically? Did I have enough sleep? Yes. Did I have sleep? Did I have enough food? Do I have the right thing? Do I have the right headspace to be able to come in and do this flight? And so being in the green is a really good phrase for that, given the nature of the complex nature of this job and all the demands that are there.
In general terms, we've always thought about fitness to fly, and that's sort of like yes or no. And really, are you in the green?
From a physical place.
From a physical, yes.
It's strictly a physical place, as opposed to what else is going on in my own
Certainly,
head.
Yeah. And I think the groups have come to understand that more and more accepting of that, but it still, I think, needs to be brought up and made us aware more often than not. A reminder that it's all of these things that are you in the green? Are you fit to fly? To check in for work. Our stressors in our profession are inherent in some ways. There's plenty that go around. We do our best to mitigate them. There's sort of this biological, psychological, and social stressors that affect us. Red-eye flying, high stress and responsibility in some situations of flying. Extended time away from home, strained home life, antisocial hours, loneliness, isolation, maintaining a balanced, nutritious diet. I mean, that's a difficult one.
Can you go back and say what that antisocial hours? Because that just sounds. What does that mean? Because I think I know what it means, but it's sort of like, I don't want to talk to people.
I think it means a little bit about that, but not so much that I can't join, let's say, a team to go play hockey and see, a group of people that support me in some sort of way. We have a connection there because I work shift work. I say, well, I'm not going to be around. I can't do that. So I think it takes us out of a community, a supportive community, hopefully, wherever that may be, for moms and dads and family, of
Kids
course.
And responsibility. That antisocial is a really interesting term because, it's not just flying is not just about certain shift work. It's more than shift work because there's no predictability of when does your shift end, when does your shift begin, and it changes every day and subject to weather, baggage, maintenance, customer complaint. There's so many variables, and so there is such an antisocial. It does not promote a sense of collaboration with community in any fashion at all. And so that's what's really powerful or quite isolating for a pilot, is because they can't regularly be depended upon to pick up the kids from school. Or, if mom wants to be able to attend the first play that her daughter is in. No. How many have we missed? How many times of school? And so that antisocial really covers all sorts of different dimensions that a lot of people really understand. The booking of an appointment for a medical appointment. Well, I can book this, but I may not be able to attend. Oh no, it's got to be 6 months in advance. No, you'll go to the bottom of the list. My schedule couldn't change.
I mean, I can speak to it. My family and my wife, it's a disproportionate amount is put on my wife, or it's put on family members, husbands, wives, partners, and even friends to make plans with. It affects us in so many different ways, and I don't think we necessarily consider that very often in our well-being of what that does, certainly going forward. So, I think when we talk about all these work-related stressors, and they certainly, over a long period of time, I think the research says that this stress causes imbalances. It causes issues to us physically, biologically, we then add an inevitability of some life event happening, and this may be too much for us to handle at times. And I think in our pilot brains, we like to understand what's going on in this aircraft systems, different things. Why are we doing this? Well, when we are struggling, I think it's sort of important to understand what's going on with me when I'm having these issues. And could you kind of speak to that specifically, the biology, what we're dealing with long-term stress or high levels of stress?
And so often we've thought about our jobs, particularly in terms of, that's what I do. That's what I have to do. And I just have to suck it up, or I just have to. And so increasingly now with the idea of a fit to fly, it's like being in the green means physically, but also emotionally. Maybe there's too much going on. We look at the life domains, such as, what's going on in my family, what's going on in my home life, what's going on with my own health. And if we've not talked about those, or we choose not to talk about those, in a sense, we become more vulnerable to getting, in a sense, attacked or, hit at the knees. So there's the challenge, is like we need to be able to be aware of, yes, there's biology, the sedentary nature of our job. We sit around an awful lot as a pilot, and we're sitting there in a certain position. That's not always a good thing. We're confined to the cockpit. We're not going for a walk. Us passengers in the back, we can get to leave when we're permitted. We can get up and walk. But the pilots are stuck there in a certain seat, in a certain position, where we may develop sort of certain ways of always behaving because we're sitting in the right seat all the time. So there's an awful lot of biology that it has an impact. But psychologically, it's tough to do a good food. We know we may be glad to fly to certain airports because we know there's good food there, but then we arrive late and we have to push on time. So we don't even get a chance to, and so we're left fending for ourselves for eating.
I know I spend a lot of bandwidth just figuring out where my next meal is going to come from that can be relatively nutritious sometimes.
And those are the kinds of, those emotional, there's a funny phrase of being hangry. You're hungry and angry because you couldn't get the food that you needed. If we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, halt. Yeah, that usually puts us into an emotional sort of distress place because we're hungry. And whether it be for physical hunger or emotional hunger, we're angry because life isn't working well. We're lonely. Nobody really understands what my job is, and I'm tired. And whether it be just a physical exhaustion or whether it's more of a fatigue factor, those are the kinds of things that are really important to sort of pay attention to. What's my halt level?
Yeah.
And so being able to know these kinds of things, yes, we understand the dynamics of the job, but also what are the dynamics that we need to do to stay well?
And that was just one of the sort of things we deal with and stressors, and it's just we need to do our best to, I think about them and understand that they're there, and we have to deal with them through a long and hopefully healthy career.
And I would offer that what worked well for us as a young pilot, maybe as a young pilot without kids or without a relationship, is very different than when you add in a spouse or when you add in the overlay of parents who are aging, who now between you and maybe a spouse or a friend, but your siblings who are having to take care of mom and dad, and being aware of all of that. The benefit is you have the access to an airplane and be able to travel across the country. The difficulty is that I don't have enough time off to get there. that can be planned for when mom or dad are going to that specific doctor's appointment. So again, it's about sort of being aware of what are the dynamics that I need to be paying attention to be in a good place emotionally.
Yeah, and I think that gets to a point of we need to do our own maintenance, essentially, and I don't think we think about that very often. And how do we go about, I don't know how you go about that, obviously thinking about it, doing something, but, what would you suggest, for us as pilots doing?
And so much of it has to do with, first of all, is recognizing that, this is an isolating profession. It's a profession that has an awful lot of responsibility and demands, and the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we apply thought and determination, we're very clear on making sure things stay safe, and we're always sort of second guessing, and those are all really important skills. But then sometimes we need to figure out how to live life outside of living in that realm. So we move into, I try and play baseball, or do a pickup game of hockey, or have a hobby in which I can take with me on the road. I've worked with a number of folks recently, and they bring their musical instrument with them, and they bring their yes, they go to the gym, but in other cases it's like, oh no, I'm going to go for a good 10K walk because I want to go see what Barcelona's like.
Sure.
And so I have the longer layover, or I do the Hawaii turn or the Saskatoon turn, and be able to sort of look at it and go, oh, well, maybe I'll look at a museum. Or maybe I'll look, try and take in as if it was my 10-year-old, and what would look like. So it's about finding those opportunities, what to do to be able to, in a sense, who am I not as a pilot? Who am I as Doug?
Yeah.
Or who am I as John? And who am I as Sue? Because, we need to figure out who are we in addition to the gal or the guy who flies airplanes.
That's right, yeah. And getting back to the are you in the green levels of where we may be, at some point we're in the yellow or orange or red, and the sort of tagline for are you in the green is talk early, talk often, which I like. It gets right to the point, and I think that's certainly helpful. I think there's some catharsis in just opening up and talking. What happens to us when we do that?
So here I brought with me a prop that I use often in my office. Many of us have, in a sense, the equivalent of a whole pile of marbles. We have big ones, we have little ones, we have some that are all the same color, we have the really big one, but they all sit in our head, or they may sit in our shoe. But sometimes there's an awful lot of noise. And so sometimes it's about, well, how do I tone this down a bit? And how do sometimes even taking the big one and putting it aside? Well, now it's not quite so noisy in my head. And so I would offer that talking, and by talking, it doesn't have to be to a whole bunch of people. It doesn't have to be to everybody. It may be only one or two people, maybe a partner, maybe a good friend, maybe a buddy that you are, that you both share the interest of cutting the grass and doing the gardening. But you just see them once a week or once every 2 weeks, and but you're able to talk, and there's a bit of a relief because you're able to take one of the marbles out of the bowl, out of your head, and be able to have it so that there's a little less pressure. And so whether it's often, I wouldn't say often, you'll know what your speed needs. And that's where the challenge is. We expect our kids to always be the same way. Oh no, everybody's different. It's about finding your own way of finding your balance. You can manage all the marbles. If there's too many marbles in your head, yeah, you're probably in the yellow, orange, maybe even the red. Mm-hmm. How do we help release that? By doing that, there's less pressure in the head.
Doug, we're in a unique situation as pilots with medicals, and talking about mental health, talking about struggles, and worrying about losing our medicals. That's a real concern, and,
it's huge.
And a valid one.
It's the only occupation that I am aware of. I've worked in employee assistance programs and workplaces for all of my career. I believe it's the only occupation that requires not only an initial medical, but a continuing medical. And so anything and everything has huge implications around, will I still hold on to my medical? And if not, oh my goodness, now what?
Yeah, and even me needing to talk to someone like you, that certainly doesn't mean I'm going to lose my medical.
No.
And perhaps at some point someone does need medication. That also does not mean you're not going to fly again.
No, not at all.
Transport Canada has a approved process for when medication is needed to regain access to the flight deck. And I don't think a lot of people know about that particular process, but it is out there, and it does not mean an end of a flying career.
And that's been relatively recent. When I was in the U.S., it was very much it just came in where there was the official 4 antidepressants which were allowed, because for so long, if you may be depressed, but you were never given an option to be able to fly if you were on medication. And so it takes a while sometimes to find out the right medication, or to be able to, in a sense, establish a norm. But it's no different than when we had a high blood pressure and our doctor threw some medication at us, and to figure out whether that would manage our medication well. It's the same thing for here. The challenge is that we can do this for mental health, and there is processes available, and talking to a therapist can be useful. It doesn't always mean you see a counselor and you will be on meds. You don't need to have both. Some people do, some people don't. Mm-hmm. But there's always options available to be able to address how do you get your medical back. And if you need to have a period of 90 days, that's why, for the most part in this country, there's good benefits available.
Doug, I think another barrier of reaching out is there's a financial one to speak to a mental health professional, really. In CA1, we had a limited amount of benefits for us going forward. I know that's changed in CA2. It's expanded some, so that hopefully will allow people a bit more flexibility, or not hesitation to reach out or go down that road, because I think it's at some points, I've spoken to counselors, it's certainly something beneficial. It has been beneficial in my life and many pilots I've spoken to. And
part of the challenge with seeking counseling is, first of all, yes, finances do fit into that, and that's where if you will, the Employee Assistance Program, or the EFAP, Employee and Family Assistance Program, run by Inkblot, is available. There you may or may not have counselors who understand the implications of a medical. And that's an important piece. And also, do you have a counselor who is really willing to sit with you and understand, without getting into the voyeuristic around, tell me what it's like to be a pilot. Mm-hmm. You're there as a human being. And so how do you find that?
Part of our role on Pilot Assistance team is to suggest sometimes, if somebody would like to speak to a mental health professional, we can give some suggestions of where they may go. People who have already spoken, mental health professionals who already have worked with pilots, mm-hmm. so you don't have to sort of tell your story about how it is being a pilot.
Right.
And we hope that is helpful for people going forward, and we think it has been.
The other thing about counseling is that often we have this sense that once you start counseling, it's in there forever. Well, not necessarily. There are many times when all you need is, if you will, a bit of a tune-up. And, that's workable within the benefit plan. And so you can do that. It's no longer limited to 1 or 2 visits. And many times counselors can be, especially if you find the right one, where the focus is more around a problem-focused or a solution-focused counseling, as opposed to, not all counseling is about telling me about your mother and your father. Mm-hmm. And what was it like growing up? I mean, that has an impact, but it's more like a shoulder check as opposed to a focus on the front. And so counseling can be useful. It's like going to the dental hygienist. It can be useful. It's not always the easiest, but it gives me, assuredness that my teeth are going to be okay for another while. And I would offer that in some ways that's what counseling can do. Touch and base, exploring what's going on, and be able to keep me in the green for a long-term purpose.
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember for our pilots. At the same time, I want to go back to talking about our medicals, and if you did have to use medication, I think it's always important to remind our pilots that any medication that you're prescribed, our CAMI needs to be aware, and you need to consult with that CAMI first of all to understand what that ramification may be with Transport Canada. So we always recommend that. And at the same time, if you are on medication, then you're going to be off for a period of time. I want to remind you that you're not going to be alone. You're not the first pilot that has had this happen. You won't be the last. On Pilot Assistance, we're here to support through that process and make sure things are going smoothly and help where we can.
And the ALPA aeromedical volunteers as well can provide that kind of support?
That's correct. And we're all kind of rolled up into one at WestJet, aeromedical and pilot assistance as well. And Doug, specifically with mental health and brain function, when we are struggling, what is going on with us and in our brains and happening? Could you explain a bit more about that?
So often, there's a sense that our brains are this disconnected thing from our feelings. In actual fact, the brain is really quite involved in feelings and impacts of mental health. And thanks to a variety of scientific studies, we now know that. For example, in depression, we know that cognitive functioning has a huge impact when we're depressed. We no longer are good with attention, concentration, memory, decision-making. We may have difficulty focusing, remembering things, or making decisions. So if we're depressed, that's a real big concern. Our executive functioning, and that's sort of the part of the brain is right in the frontal cortex. It impairs. We're no longer as able, when we're depressed, to be able to do planning and problem solving and working memory. And so that can be a big issue if we're not able to sort of have the flexibility to problem solve. We can't just always rely on the checklist. Sometimes we have to remember that there is a different checklist. And if we don't have that working memory because of our slower impact, the psychomotor speed by which our brain is functioning actually will be less when we're in depressed mode. You can see that when you watch somebody who's depressed and you physically watch them shuffle along. So it's no longer that they have a sense of vitality and energy, but they're kind of just sort of slowly walking. And again, they may feel sluggish, but then we're having troubles figuring out how to complete tasks in a timely fashion. And so those are some of the major factors just for depression. For anxiety, on the other side, those are the two issues that we most often see. We have troubles with attention. If we're ping-ponging all over the place because we're moving from topic to topic. We have racing thoughts. We're worried about everything that happens in the future. We're having a hard time paying attention to the moment. We want our pilot, as they're landing, to be paying attention to just in the moment. There's a reason why there's what's it called below 10,000 feet? A sterile cockpit?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so we need to have that. But if our brain is functioning not in a healthy way, it's ping-ponging all over the place, we're now, maybe in a sense, more yellow or orange or red in terms of well-being. Our working memory can get impaired by our anxiety. And so all of both of these functioning of the brain, it's all impacted by the way our neurons and our neurotransmission functioning goes on in the brain. Has huge impacts around serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and GABA and all of these drugs or all of these chemicals in our brain. There may be too many or not enough. And so there are times when medication may be needed to reestablish the balance, or there needs to be a way to sort of slow or make the brain in a healthier fashion. Whether it's through talking and helping in that fashion, or whether it's through the support of medication, there's a whole bunch of ways to be able to get there. But really critical to make sure that we don't go into our yellow or orange or red zone.
Thanks, Doug. That's really great information, I think, for us all to sort of have a good understanding of what's happening. I think we know that something's happening, but to sort of have a bit of background there. That's really great. And thank you again for being here with us.
Well, thank you.
I hope you can join us again on these series. I want to bring it back to Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May, and when we're putting this out, and really back to the Are You in the Green campaign that ALPA has. We run checklists all day long. We're great at doing that in the flight deck and getting the plane going from A to B safely. I think we have to have that self-evaluation and critical checklist for ourselves. We have to have that checklist. Are these things in my life that are stressors that I'm going to have? When is it too much? When are we in a place where we're unfit to fly? We're not in the green anymore, and we're somewhere else.
And where do I get the resources and realize that I'm not going to be there forever, but maybe this is just this is a little bit of turbulence, and then how do we just adjust and change altitude or change resources, getting connected with others, being mindful, paying attention to what's going on right now, getting active, physically active, still learning and maintaining my hobbies or maintaining my outside interests so that I'm not just a single dimension kind of guy or gal, and giving time to others and nurturing our relationships.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. That's great, and thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening to this special edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilot Podcast.